Studiosity acknowledges the traditional Indigenous custodians of country throughout Australia and all lands where we work, and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to elders both past and present.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Peter Radoll. I'm a Professor of Information Technology, Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the Victoria University. I'm an N1 man, so I come from the cold climate of the top end of New South Wales, the high country New South Wales. So that's where my people have come from. I've born in Tamworth, and I've spent a lot of time in Sydney, Taree, Tamworth, Canberra, and now in Melbourne.
So Peter, what's sort of driven you throughout your career?
Well, Judith, I've had three careers, I guess, all up. Started off as a motor mechanic initially, and then went to university, became a public servant for about 7 years, and now I switched into academia in 2003, I think it was, somewhere in there, and stayed in academia ever since. And then, of course, had a fantastic time in academia. But the thing that drives me most is actually creating opportunities for other people, particularly students and staff and career development. So it's a definite passion. And you get to do things like research and teaching along the way, not so much now in my role, but definitely has been that in the past for sure. So yeah, I suppose it's paying it forward, if you like, in terms of what we do for students and for staff. Yeah.
So this conversation is about reconciliation. What does reconciliation mean for you as a proud Indigenous man?
Yeah, well,
but what does it also mean in terms of how you drive it in an institution?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good, damn fine question about reconciliation. Look, I'm a passionate reconciliationist, if you like. A number of my colleagues in different organisations, as I've gone through, are not, and for good reason. They feel very strongly that the communities are separated and they stay separated until there's a treaty, and then there may be a reconciliation through that process. My view is that I get that perspective and I really understand that perspective. My view is that we both, the Indigenous and non-Indigenous community, has to come a little way together, and then we'll actually, together we'll be better, if you like. That wonderful saying from Nelson Mandela, which I absolutely love, together we're better. And then, move forward. So, it's about us giving up a little bit of our autonomy, but also the non-Indigenous community giving up some of their power, if you like, and then coming together and, creating something quite unique. And like, I've done that a few times in different organisations. My previous University of Canberra had a long history of commitment to reconciliation, and I happened to be there as a student in 1998 when the Vice-Chancellor signed the very first reconciliation commitment, and I happened to be there at the same time when the very first reconciliation action plan was designed at the University of Canberra as well. So it's really interesting to watch the growth of that process, that reconciliation process. But it's about the communities coming together for the common good. And I think we've actually, Judith, I think we really have made a difference in the last, particularly the last probably 8 or 9 years. Going back before that, it was a little bit hard. And I'll just reflect a little bit on this with some colleagues this last reconciliation week, saying, if you go back 10 years and you organised a morning tea for reconciliation, you'd be lucky to get half a dozen people. These days, if you organise a morning tea or an event for Reconciliation Week, you've got to have a fairly large room. So something's changed, and I think Australia's become a little bit more mature and we're understanding what reconciliation does. And as we invite more non-Indigenous people into the Aboriginal space or the Indigenous space, and say, you know what, we're on a journey together. You want to join us on a journey together. So I think, for me, reconciliation is about making the world just a really better place for all of us, not just for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but coming together to make the world a better place for all.
So what will the conditions be that will enable and facilitate, in inverted commas, meaningful reconciliation?
Meaningful. Yes. Look, I think it's going to be different in every context, Judith. I think if, so from my perspective, it's going to be different for health, for example. If we can get the health outcomes under control, right? If we can, I know that's one of the Close the Gap sort of initiative, but if we can get the health outcomes under control, stop, shorten the death gap, if you like, in things like reducing the incarceration rates. There's so much. I mean, and in the higher education sector, the 9-year completion rate for non-Indigenous students, or for all students, if you like, is 74%. But the 9-year completion rate for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students is only 47%. So 53% of Indigenous students who start a degree never complete. It's not to say they don't go on to university later on in life or go off and have a great career in some other way, or a startup or whatever it might be. But the reality is that 53% of those who start never finish. So for me, reconciliation would be, in the practical sense, addressing those really big gaps in what we see across our sector and our society. It's just, while we can talk and, have initiatives and all these wonderful opportunities, reconciliation is not going to be settled until some of those really, long-term issues are addressed.
You're working in a university that prides itself on its inclusiveness and widening participation agenda. How well are they travelling?
Look, that's a very good question, Judith. I can say as an institution, we have the largest number of first and family students by far. Victoria University, nearly over 50% of our students are first and family, which does present a bit of a challenge. I think, with a lot more supports required for first and family, as we know, across the sector. In terms of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander focus, I think there's definitely room for improvement. And just recently, and I don't know if this is completely public, even though I put it out on LinkedIn just recently, is that the Vice Chancellor has asked me to play the role of Deputy Vice Chancellor, Indigenous, Equity and Inclusion, after having another role. So my old portfolio no longer exists. Mm-hmm. And then he's asked me to actually focus on First Nations outcomes here at Victoria University. So Council's made a commitment. The Vice Chancellor has recognised that we could, there could be some, we could do better in this space, and he's asked me to actually take on a new portfolio and go our hardest to actually make a better place and a stronger focus on First Nations education, research and engagement, and particularly the Aboriginal History Archive here as well, with Gary Foley's collection is here at Victoria University. So I think we could improve, but the announcement of my new role is definitely going to shift the dial significantly as a Deputy Vice Chancellor, focusing on Indigenous aspects and inclusion and belonging as well. So, equity and inclusion as well. So it's going to make a real strong focus. I think as an institution, we do very, very well. We also have a unique model of education. So the block model, I've heard of the block model before I came here, but not the VU block model. It's quite different. We have, 4 week, you learn one unit at a time over 4 weeks.
Mhm.
Small class sizes of up to 36. So it's very focused, it's very purposeful, and very successful. Our student, we've seen quite an uptick in terms of student success with the model, and we actually attract a lot of students from neurodiverse backgrounds as well, because they can hyper focus on one subject at a time rather than 4 subjects, which is not always the best way to learn. So I think we're doing pretty good on inclusion and belonging generally, from a very diverse background, but we definitely could make some improvements from an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspective. And like I said, the Vice Chancellor, Adam Shoemaker, has recognised that and made the recommendation and created a new role to actually assist with that going forward.
Well, congratulations on that. And I
Thank you.
think it will be interesting and challenging. And talking about interesting and challenging, the other moment that we're in is the discussion about the voice.
Yeah.
So what do you see the relationship is between reconciliation, as you've been describing it, and the voice?
Yeah, look, let me answer this question in a slightly different way to what I would do normally. If I was living in Canberra still, I would answer it in a particular way, but let me provide you some context. So one of the things that I've learned living here in Victoria, we have a very strong voice in Victoria. You would know Lydia Thorpe is a senator here in Victoria. She's also a close colleague and ally of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff here at Victoria University as well. So that's the context that you need to understand. In Victoria, Dan Andrews, the Victorian government, the Premier Dan Andrews, when the federal government rejected the statement, the Uluru Statement from the Heart back in 2017, Dan Andrews decided to create the Australia's first treaty legislation in 2018 and created the Treaty Assembly and the URUC, the Royal Commission into the treatment of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here in Victoria. And of course, the treaty process is well and truly underway here in Victoria. So that's the context that it's really important that the rest of Australia understands that the treaty process is very close to be, I wouldn't say settled yet, but I think the first one's definitely going to happen within the next 12 months, the very first treaty here in Victoria. My view is that the voice is fantastic opportunity for reconciliation. I can't see, it's one of those practical things. I can't see anything wrong with the voice. I think the voice is an opportunity to have an input. It's a very passive voice, and this is one of the things that I hear pushback from in terms of the Victorian context. Even though it's a passive voice, it still is a voice that we can make recommendations to Parliament and to the executive government on policies associated with our communities. Now, this is not without precedent, by the way. We did have ATSIC before that, and before ATSIC there was the National Aboriginal Education Committee, and there was the old NAC as well. So there's been iterations of the voice, if you like, to Parliament previously. They've all been legislated, and the only difference between this one we're talking about at the moment and the one's previous ones is this one we're hoping to get into the Constitution to make it a firm voice, so that's going to be there forever in recognising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I love to quote my Vice Chancellor Adam Shoemaker. I think this is a great quote. He goes, wouldn't it be better to have a bridge to somewhere than a chasm to nowhere? And I love that quote because it really you really envisage what that might look like, or both options, the bridge to somewhere, but the chasm to nowhere. You can actually visualize both of those, and you think, well, a bridge to somewhere would be much nicer than a chasm to nowhere, because we've spent it, hundreds of years with a chasm to nowhere. This is a bridge to somewhere, and it's not just a bridge to somewhere; it's a bridge to the truth-telling process. It's a bridge to a treaty process, and that may be another 2 or 3 generations, but it will come. I do think, but it's a really practical reconciliation opportunity. But I do think that at the federal level, it's much more difficult to actually enshrine in a treaty process or the voice, because the Constitution, and it's so easy to sow doubt in people's minds. And then there's all these conspiracies and so on and so forth. I think that with fingers crossed that the voice gets up. I think it's going to be really important because those health and education policies and having the input is really important. But I do think it's the states and territories that will actually bring the treaty process to fruition. They'll bring it together. So, states and territories, you see that in South Australia, you'll see the voice to Parliament in South Australia. I know that New South Wales is on the path as well. I know that Queensland government, ACT government's been talking about the treaty process for some time as well. So I think the states and territories will bring treaties rather than the federal government, but the voice is going to be really, really important for policies such as health and education to try to address those long-term systemic challenges that we've had in our communities.
Do you think there are generational differences in terms of how Australians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, interpret and enact the voice and reconciliation?
Yes. Yeah, look, that's a really good question, Judith, because I've really struggled with this a little bit with reconciliation, because one of the things, and some people get this and some people don't. So one of the things that some non-Indigenous people think is that reconciliation is an Aboriginal thing, and that somehow the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community's got to come 90% of the way in terms of on the journey, when really, if you look at it very pragmatically, it's kind of the other way around. It's like the non-Indigenous community should come 90% this way, and we should go 10% that way. But I tend to go 50-50 because, at least that sounds like equality. But the reality is that most, I wouldn't say most, but there's a lot of non-Indigenous people think that reconciliation is an Aboriginal thing, and it probably doesn't. They probably don't have to do much, or don't have to have an impact, or it's like, as long as it doesn't affect them, they're okay, sort of thing. It might be interesting to note that the very first CEO of Reconciliation Australia was a non-Indigenous person, Barbara Livesley. So she was the very first CEO of Reconciliation Australia. It just so happens since then there've been a succession of Aboriginal CEOs of Reconciliation since then, and I think you probably get more leverage having an Aboriginal CEO of Reconciliation Australia than a non-Indigenous person. But it's really important that we have strong allies. And look, they're everywhere. I mean, we have really strong allies. Things have really moved along. So, and some examples, like I sit on the board of the Smith family, for example. And the people who drive reconciliation in the Smith family are the non-Indigenous executives. It's not the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff. And there's an Aboriginal advisory body that helps with the process as well. So they get it. But not all organisations do. So my previous university, at University of Canberra, where I had to drive the reconciliation process in partnership with one of the executives, who was a Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research, because as Lee Sullivan, because he had a passion for reconciliation. He thought it was the right thing to do, and about time that we addressed some of the really difficult challenges in Australia, and he was up for that. Not everybody sees that process as being a non-Indigenous process. A lot of people think it's an Aboriginal process. But like I say, there are pockets that are shifting their ideas and they're really understanding and owning that process, and say, you know what, you've suffered enough, you've carried the load, if you like, the cultural load enough for so long. How about we help you along the journey now? And that's my happy space really there.
And that's a great place to finish our conversation, Peter. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you for giving me time today in your very busy day. And congratulations on your new challenge. And I look forward to running into you at Universities Australia sometime.
Thank you very much, Judith. And thank you so much for the opportunity. Go well.
You too. Bye.
Thank you.